You're in a serious problem. Your reading is terrible. Also, I need to revise all hiragana and katakana. Wait. What's going on? No panic. No picnicu. Let's not picnic here. What's wrong, Okami? Your reading is terrible? How so? How so, Okami? Nihongo ben... I'm guessing you're saying you've studied Japanese since 2020? That's a really long time. Height? Okay. Okay. Dang. That's a long time. You and Lotus are... Actually, Lotus might be slightly longer. You and Lotus are about the same tenure. That means irai. Still haven't gotten irai. Recognize the irai though. Irai. Sorry. The irai part. Okay. So they went denwa shimasu. Interesting. So suru with the denwa. It seems. Okay.
今から山田先生に電話します。
Okay.
今
Imakara sensei. I heard sensei. Maybe someone?
山田
Yamada
先生
sensei.
に今から山田先生に電話します。
Denwa shimasu.
電話します。
You're mixing letters? Oh, it'll take time. Have you started like how are you doing your kana right now? Okami. Mixing letters. It takes time. I did it in batches. Are you trying to do everything all at once? Okami? For your hiragana and your katakana? It took me a while. I did it in batches though. Like 4 each day. Gotta find some fun way to practice hiragana and katakana. How are you practicing your letter? How are you practicing your kana now, Okami? I've not been to Japan. Oh, you started in 2023? Really? That's not what your account says. Oh, I guess maybe it's indie. I might be thinking about indie. I guess you mean you seriously started, right? I always had this feeling that you had more than 2023. Also, you're reading the sentence like a chain, not knowing when I finish a full word like a chain. You got me. The whole thing is connected. I see. You're reading the whole thing, but not knowing when I finish a full word. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I see. Do you have any memory aids that you're using to separate things? I mean, I spent quite a lot, like, I mean, I don't know if you use Duolingo or not, but Duolingo does this thing where they do actually separate the things. However, at the same time, I like the sound of things, so you tend to visualize where the breakup is at some point when you start speaking it. Oh, so your account says 2016, but you didn't actually. Okay, that's fair enough. I kind of just thought you started with Japanese. So that was my bad, Lotus. I actually thought sometime between 2016 and now you had at least a couple years. I suppose there was a very excellent chance that you started in some other language. You know all the letters, but you keep forgetting. I see. Okami. Yeah, that can be tough. I don't know what I would say. Um, my experience with kana was I used brute force. So I think the only thing I could really say is sometimes when you write the letters, you know, kind of like when you write and speak and write in tandem while seeing what you write is how I went about it. So this is the brute force method. I did it like when I was in elementary school. So I write the kana on a piece of paper and then I speak it at the same time. And then because I'm writing and speaking, I can hear and see it at the same time. So that's kind of what I did for maybe 2 weeks. And then that was about it. The rest is history. You are speed running Duolingo right now and revising kana and hida through Duolingo while I'm doing immersion. Oh, I see. Yeah, that could do it. I don't typically it's difficult for me to say anything about speed running without foundations. So generally I can't really make a lot of comment on what happens when people jump into the deep end and continue to jump into the deep end. I'm a foundational person, Oki, so I always start bottom up. I start bottom up on life skills. So it sounds like you did a leap and then you're still doing immersion without foundations, which can help. I mean, like, lots of people do top down, where they take as complicated as possible. They take it as complicated as possible and then go as far down as possible on the foundation and then build it in both directions. I typically build bottom up. Immersion is good, though it's slow. I disagree with using words like slow and fast with a specific method. It's relative to the individual's practice skills. So for example, technically, even though I'm very practiced in bottom up approach, this part is the slowest, relatively speaking, because this is the most detailed. I'm most practiced at the bottom side. Higher complexity is when things get faster, but it really is based on the individualized practice skill. Yeah. What precisely does that mean? You iron out all the parts. You concern yourself with all the parts before you see the complex thing. So for Japanese, I decide to build from the parts to the most complex things. So I didn't start anything with like immersion for some time. I used comprehensible input. So I only went bottom up in comprehensible input. So if I can't comprehend past an 80 to 90%, much like Duolingo is like really high. Duolingo is like 95+%. So when you go from unit to unit, it's incredibly comprehensible. So I drop down to like 90 when I'm doing other things other than Duolingo. So you're doing bottom up, as in you build on everything you know as much as you can know, which starts with like kana and simple sentences, and then you slowly get up to complexity, like the holistic approach. At the top here, this is usually what most people are referring to as immersion. Although immersion can be broken up into CI, comprehensible input, or basically active, I don't know what this is called, active struggling, or total immersion, right? Total immersion. My mother tongue is the result of total immersion, which obviously there's gaps. Like I can't read in my mother language, so that's kind of why total immersion top down has its benefits in terms of its speed and intuition. However, you will lack foundations as well if you don't deconstruct them. So most people who focuses on immersions, in my opinion, will eventually hit somewhere where they have to work on foundations again. So they would have to drop down to a lower comprehension, to a lower complexity to increase comprehension in order to get a grasp and work on their foundations. Those are presumptions, they're not assumptions, but I'm presenting a clear thought experiment in explaining potential outcomes, why they would do certain things. They are not in any way assumptions, because assumptions would insist that it is the case. But in this case, I'm suggesting to Okami how I'm framing what might be happening to that person. Does that method work if I do it only in the ones I mix? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah? So you're suggesting, does it work if you focus on only the kana you mix up? I don't know. I think that's usually what, if I had to be bold, that's what usual people do, right? They bootstrap. So they brute force. They brute force and quote unquote correct the mistake by hyper focusing on the kana. So if you have like a bunch of errors, it's kind of like people who use flashcards like Anki. If you have a low percentage pair or association that has high rate of error, they might dedicate high rate of error. They might dedicate specifically to hyper focusing on those errors. Sometimes other people, what they do is instead of hyper focusing, they work around the problem. And eventually that problem kind of solves itself. That can happen too. But that's largely why people rely on immersion. Immersion has in my opinion, has often a pre-selection for individuals who want to intuit problem solving, as opposed to analytically deconstructing the problem, which I tend to favor using analytical approach than intuition, because I'm not a very intuitive person. You're only speedrunning the easy parts now? I stopped, actually. I made it to section 1 and failed the skip test and started learning. I see. If you're speedrunning, right? If you're speedrunning, in my opinion, if you're speedrunning anything for learning, right? One thing I want to this is unsolicited advice, so it's not professional advice. It's not professional advice here, but when you speedrun anything, usually that means you have full comprehension, right? You're making the assumption that you have full comprehension, right? Now the downside about full comprehension is oftentimes one become complacent. So when you have full comprehension, you'll become a person tend to become complacent, and what happens is you get diminished returns on learning. Diminished return on learning. What I'm saying is, if you think you can speed run something, you're assuming you have full comprehension of the thing, therefore you're speed running, as opposed to slowing down and taking time to see if you actually do have 100% comprehension. So if you're speedrunning something that you don't actualize 100% comprehension, then you'll have gaps. You'll start to develop gaps. And speedrunning creates complacency that leads to gaps, and acceptable gaps. Like, oh yeah, like for me, here's a gap that happens, but I'm not really saying that I have 100% command, and that's mixing like these two, right? Right, mixing and o. If I'm reading really rapidly, I can catch myself mixing and o, or being too lax, not being too focused. So generally speaking, I don't ever focus on increasing my efficiency unless I'm well aware that I have near 100% comprehension. I place it at about 95%. If I can say 95%, then it's fine, because 5% for human error, sure, for like being not focused day in and day out. But the idea is, if you think you're mixing up something and you're speed running that content already, then you're making a psychological mindset of saying you are comprehending the stuff enough to be able to speed run it. So that means you're no longer focused on learning new things. You're focused on practicing all the things you know already. So if you know 100% of what you are practicing, then you are speeding up. You're increasing the efficiency by practicing. However, learning things falls by the wayside. You already know these things. So usually speed running is not something that typically emphasizes learning anything. Right? You're not really focused on that. To get faster, you're making the thing you already learned more efficient. I don't know if that helps or not. I'm just rambling a little bit. But that whole idea of speeding through things is a different dimension of results that people want to get. If you want to get faster, more practice. If you want higher comprehension, you have to slow down and learn more, right? I don't know what the problem is though, Okami. So I don't know what it takes the person itself that's learning to spot the difference. Since I'm not your teacher or someone who follows all your progress, it's difficult to know if there's no way I could offer any form of even friendly advice on where your problem areas are. I know where my problems areas are, and therefore I don't ever speed run until I know I can compensate for those problem areas. Let's see. Neware, for example, it makes me sit for a good 10 seconds to realize which is which. Basically is like a double-edged sword. I get you. Yeah. So you're trading it off, right? If you want to practice for speed, then you trade off learning potential. But when you're learning something, you end up slowing down. So you have to choose when that is and if you're satisfied with it, right? And then obviously using the language for whatever your purpose are. Neware. I don't know what neware is, but you're talking about like ne, wa, and de. Yeah. So you're talking about these three kana characters, right? Ne. That's awful. I don't. It's fine. Wa. And yeah. The letters. Yeah. The kana. Yeah. This is awful, by the way. My bad. I got a little. Yeah. So ne, wa, and de. Yeah. I get you. I think it takes time, but I don't know how you're gonna go about it. Honestly, I would pick something like neko, neko, kore, maybe neko, kore, and wa, watashi. So if you pick like neko, I'm not gonna write the kana for you because you can probably try to visualize the kana, but neko, neko, kore, and watashi. So you can see that I ne, de. I guess using two ko's might be bit, and then wa, right? So if you can envision these three, they don't have overlapping. These two are overlapping. Maybe kore is a bad idea. What's another good common word? De. I'm picking things right off the top of my head, but if you visualize the word, that could help you associate the kana, right? So like neko, if you can learn cat, for example, neko, then you can probably visualize the kana for this, neko. I was trying to pick others, and then watashi, right? Then you'll be able to see wa. So pick your favorite word that you use a lot. I would pick a word that you use a lot and think, use that word as the basis. Eventually you'll ditch the word. So like after a while you're like, oh yeah, what is ne? Neko. And then think of neko. And then after a while you won't need it anymore. It'll just go away and you'll know what ne is. At least that's what I would start with. Probably pick your favorite word that has the have ne, wa, and de separate. Like there's no other, just one ne, one wa, and one de, and keep those with you as a start. Perhaps that might work. What else? Okay, so what precise? Okay, what is top down then? Reasonable assumption. I myself consult dictionary. Yeah, well, one trick I use is insert Japanese word blank means meaning, so you get the definition via Google search in Japanese language. I see. Hey there, He. Long time no see. How are you? If I do that, I get Chinese definition. That's a fair point. In most cases, you get not Chinese. Okay. Yeah, that is one way, doing Google and doing the top down. Yeah, doing the top down approach. I want to know how often I do that. I don't think I've done it too often, but now I do both. So it's not like I'm exclusively doing bottom up. When I started, it was bottom up. Now I have, foundations where I started dabbling in like top down approaches. Like things avoidable. For example, once a week I watch anime with my friends, and my friends and we would pick any anime. So if I'm engaging in that anime, it would be top down. I haven't planned on it being comprehensible input. When I watch anime alone, I've been selectively choosing anime that is within my comprehensible range. So then I don't reach for the dictionary and reach for verb conjugators and whatnot. However, I still engage in immersion quite a lot. Actually, whenever I'm talking to you guys, only the people that know me are using comprehensible inputs. All the new people that I meet every once in a while, it's still a form of top-down learning, because it's someone using a Japanese phrase I can't read. I try to decode it, and then that person immediately explaining it to me. That's the top-down approach. That is what a lot of people are used to doing. Being told what it is afterwards. And then you learn by iterating on being told what it is. Lotus always makes this joke when we're talking, spoiling a 1,000-year-old language, basically. Let's see. Your 729-day streak on Duolingo, and you're 1/3 in the diamond tournament? You're 1/3. 1 out of 3? Wait, 1/3. Nice. I know that there are diamond tournaments. That's pretty cool. Keep it up. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. Alright, let's refocus.
今から山田先生に電話します。
今から山田先生に電話します。Okay. I like this phone thing. I think Duolingo, that's a clever way. Let me see what denwa suru actually come, or so there's denwa, and then they added suru, yeah, to do a phone call, yeah, and then they just call it phoning, yeah. Okay, Maku, what do you think Duolingo would actually improve? You want to split your day for anime and immersion, and an app that might help me in a weakness you have? What do I think Duolingo will improve? I think since it sounds like you make a lot of, if I have to conservatively say, like, Anki, oh sorry, Anki. Okay, Anki, if you're making time for Anki and immersion already, the only thing, the Duolingo will only likely to, I'm not gonna say only, the most likely case that Duolingo can improve something for you is for reinforcements. Since you're spending a lot of time immersing and using Anki already, it's reinforcement. That's about what Duolingo can offer you, because what you're probably doing in combination here is already overlapping with what Duo does. So it's reinforcement, like vocabulary. That's probably the only reasonable thing, and it's reinforcement of vocabulary, not introduction of vocabulary anymore. If you're making time for Anki based on your own interests, and then you're doing immersion based on your own interest, right? Based on your own interest, the thing it can do is reinforce vocabulary and maybe introduce a smaller subset of vocabulary that you don't commonly use. So if you don't commonly, how about grammar? No grammar. You're not gonna get grammar the way you're doing it. No grammar. It's like less than 10% grammar. Word conjugations, it's gonna be slower. It's probably gonna be less than immersion and Anki. You'll discover more in Anki and immersion by the time you see it. It's still reinforcement. Most of it is reinforcement. Duolingo gave you a lot of early vocabulary, which I used together with sustained fairly low level immersion over time, plus talking with Japanese people. Yeah, That's probably the closest thing I would say. However, the talking with you know, a fairly low level immersion is what I would prefer to call as high comprehensible input. So from my perspective, it's high comprehensible input as opposed to low level immersion. However, for Okami, it would mean low level immersion as well. Yeah, from your perspective. So most often I have not understood what I've heard without aid. Yeah. So if you do you mean low level as in I actually okay, let me clarify a little bit. So the way I'm saying high comprehensible is that the goal of high comprehensible input is that you understand most of it. You understand past a threshold. So usually my threshold would be like 90%. Low level immersion means you're not as immersed. Meaning most of it is comprehensible. A high level of immersion means that you don't concern yourself with how much you know, you're just immersing. As in like total immersion. You don't care how much you comprehend, you're just going for a high level of immersion. You're just in there. You strip away your entire native language and soak in your total language. That's usually a very low comprehension. So you're in a low comprehensible state is how I'm using these terms. Do crazy. Oh, thanks, Dalibor. Thank you for the kind words. So it is a format to build structure, then add more sources while using it. Yes. So Duolingo, if there's something that Duolingo improves in a person. So let's ask, like I've used Duolingo for 97 days, right? And that's over, I don't even know anymore. I've lost track. It's like over 700 hours, right? If there's anything you can extrapolate from Duolingo is visual presentation, how you visualize things, right? Like these boxes, right? How you respond to audio cues in this format. How much aid you need. So how much like aid representation you need. There are a lot of things you can extract that doesn't deal with Japanese itself. Like your target language is the context. However, Duolingo does, if you deconstruct what Duolingo is doing for you, you could learn something from that. So if you're talking about improving something, using a tool and asking yourself what it does for you, and then if you need it or not, and the pros and cons of those things will help you learn what's working for you and what's not working for you. So, for example, if you have a word bank here, it means you aren't doing that, right? So you aren't doing this part. So whenever you ask yourself if you're using Anki, immersion, whatever methods that you're doing, make sure to remember that you have to keep conscious effort to know that the tool is doing something for you. So remember all the things that it's doing for you and ask yourself, what happens when they go away? As in, when you're outside and about talking to Japanese people or reading or something, what went away? What was the thing that was aiding you? So Duolingo is near 100%. So it is doing a lot for you. And the way I'm using Duolingo is to use those things, but still do them. So for example, when I see ima, in my head, I also see ima. And I also see ima. And I kind of think is this. So there are a lot of things I'm doing at the same time that this one symbol that's conveniently provided for me on Duolingo. So my goal is that while a tool is doing something for you, you have to remind yourself that it's a great time to practice it on your own. Right? So there's one thing, for example, speaking. Yes, there's pitch accent and all that stuff, but if you use Duolingo and never speak out loud, right? You could be the best reader in the world, but if you don't speak out loud, you can't actually do that task. And then if you don't write or read or do these in a void, like on a blank piece of paper, you won't be able to output them. You can comprehend them though. Like people can start speed running them. That's perfectly fine. But eventually you have to learn how to output and not become dependent on the process that they offer. And that's kind of your tool selection. Anki honestly does less. This is the irony of things. Anki actually does less for you. And you do more for yourself. You end up doing more for yourself. You're the one that you're in charge of determining what is in your Anki. You go out and look for what your weak points are, and then you load it into Anki. Duolingo doesn't. They try. They try, like they do weak words and personalized practice, but generally they're removing all the need for that. So if they're telling you what your weak points are, then you aren't doing that anymore. You no longer practice seeing what you're weak at and what you're strong at, because a tool is doing all of that for you. And I don't, right? After a while, I do it myself. And I do it myself on top of Duolingo. So the only thing Duolingo can offer you is tell you about what you need, what you may need, what doesn't work, and what might work, right? What might work. I think that's one thing you can improve on. Okay, so let me read. So I've been trying to learn Japanese again after a while of not doing anything. Okay, how's that going? Dalibor. My goal right now is to be able to recognize 2,000 kanji. Oh yeah, the gold standard. Have been doing 30 a day using Anki. Fair enough. Dalibor, you're trying to get to that 2k kanji. Okay, sure. Okay, Maku, for a low comprehensible person, in order to improve, he just has to expose himself to a high level immersion content, even though the input is very low. You have to find out if it works for you. So if you're doing lots of low level immersion, right? As in, it's very hard. It's very, like, you don't know a lot, right? There's low comprehension. Try high comprehension. I'm going backwards. So if you're low, as in you can understand everything, right? That might help. Right now, it sounds like you're immersing a lot, but you have low comprehension. right? You're going to your dictionary and all that stuff. You're doing the Souls-like kind of thing, going, the Souls-like. You're going Souls-like. My only suggestion here is that try doing both. Experiment. For me, I generally tell people that what brings consistency, in my opinion, is how many different ways you can learn. How many different ways you can learn. Because if you can continue to explore different methods, eventually you will learn over time, intuit whatever works and blend them all together. Instead of like hyper focusing on one thing to do. So if Duolingo can offer that, then that might be beneficial. Like Duolingo is incredibly high comprehension. So if you complement low comprehension with high, maybe that'll work. Like it'll blend it together. But for me, I generally encourage people not to focus on one thing, just one way to do things, or like if you have more tools, more methods, each method will have different things that will engage you. And as long as they're, in my opinion, as long as the effector factors, right, like things that motivation and engagement is not dropped in these things, you will have lots of tools at your exposure. And those tools shouldn't overlap. When you have like 4 tools doing the same thing, then that's where people say like, oh, which is better? And that's fair. That's fair if they're doing the same thing. However, you have many tools that are doing different things for you, then you intuitively plug up all the gaps, in my opinion. So if you have a tool that is great for listening, stick with it, right? Go find a tool that's maybe encourages you to write. Go find a tool that is focused on sentence structure. Go find a tool that's focused on grammar. And what happens is when you engage in the tool that is for grammar, for example, like if you have a tool for grammar, a tool for speaking, a tool for writing, I don't know, a tool for images, right? Images, and a tool for like immersion, right? So when you're doing immersion, you might be doing some of these things differently. While you're using this tool, you might be doing this stuff, right? And if you're using this, and what happens over time is you're going to not stick with one thing. You're going to engage yourself in different ways. And oftentimes, in my opinion, this is an intuitive way to compensate for gaps. If you want to stick with tools, right? Compensate. For me, I took one tool, Duo, and I know that I need lots of different things around Duolingo. So what I did was I take these things and bring them into Duolingo. Since I spent most of my time collecting ways to learn. So what happens is all of these things, I'm doing these things while I'm using Duolingo. So, and then I take all the things I learned from Duolingo and add them to the new things. So when I'm watching anime, the things that I learned from Duolingo is being added to anime. At the moment, if you're relying on tools, right? And you don't have a tool that is supporting some gap in your knowledge, then immersion doesn't necessarily fill those gaps. And you're there to, I'm encouraging you to go look for more things, right? Things that you can integrate. Sometimes having one tool that does everything, right? One tool that does everything, which is what most people hope for. When you're doing when one tool does everything, then you do nothing. That's kind of the downside. So a lot of times people wish Duolingo does everything, right? Does everything. And if Duolingo did everything, then the problem, in my opinion, comprehension goes down. Like you actually get less comprehension when the tool does everything. So the thing is, you use more than Duolingo. You use other things that Duolingo doesn't do. What doesn't Duolingo do? Conversations, because it's pretty terrible. So I use vlogs. All right, well, where am I going to get readings? Grade reader, because I need stories. So what happens is Duolingo is offering something that my vlogs don't, and grade readers are offering something that these two don't. They don't offer them. So what happens then is I have to do what Duo is doing and what vlogs are doing for me while I'm reading grade readers. And then when I'm looking at vlogs, I have to do what Duo and grade readers do. And then when I'm using Duolingo, I'm thinking of my vlogs and my grade readers. So what happens here is that over time, you don't become reliant on the tool. You learn to do all the tools at some point. It's kind of like riding a bike. Well, there are components of a bike, right? You need to learn some skill 1, skill 2, skill 3. But hey, where do you start? Well, you could be aided in skill 2 and 3 while working on skill 1. And then you can aid 1 and 2 while working on skill 3. And then you swap it up and you combine 1 and 3 aided and then work on skill 2. So when you're working on something very complicated, you can deconstruct it, right? So what happens then is at some point, you will be working on 1, 2, and 3, but not all of them at once. You don't work on all of them at once, unless you can. And this does work for some people. Total immersion can work for some people, because they can work on all those skills at once, right? If that sounds like you, continue, right? If it doesn't, it is possible to schedule a type of learning where you can separate the skills and work on one target part, and then find another one and then target something else. So then at some point, you don't have a single tool compensating for your entire skill set. Because if it does, then you inherently learn less. Because you're not really doing anything. You don't have to do these things if a tool is doing it for you. Yeah. So as much as I wish that everyone has true immersion talent, as in you hop into whatever and you immediately soak it up, we're not all kids anymore, right? Adults, in my opinion, stray farther and farther away from total immersion, because adults have lots of other skills, and they're either going to complement the skill you're learning, or they're going to create interference, right? And it's a balance between leveraging your existing skills. If you can leverage your existing skills in the context of your target skill. And that's what I do most of the time. I focus on how do I leverage all my skills while using something. And I no longer focus on what can the tool do for me, as in it's a slight perspective change, but what can a tool offer me? Sorry, the word is offer me. So what can it take away? What skill can it take away that I don't have to do anymore? That's what, in my opinion, people should be looking at when they're talking about learning. You're not looking for a tool to take away practicing something. You're looking at how you can use a tool to benefit you. And what I mean by that is, what can the tool do? Not replace. So what is Anki replacing? What is Anki doing for you? It's giving you words, right? It's reminding you of things. So at some point, you have to practice not having the flashcard. So what happens when you take the flashcard away, right? What if Anki disappears? What is it doing? So in some way, you have to practice that at some point. You have to practice constructing sentences without the use of Anki. And the greater the tool is, like the more the tool does, the more things you have to work on. So it's kind of humorous because if something appears as easier per se, it also, you've heard this cliche before, if it's easier, then there are less things to learn, right? Someone perceives something as easier because there's less to learn. There can be more to practice. That's a whole different story. An easy thing you can practice to be faster. A harder thing for someone, for anyone, however, there will be more things to learn, less time to practice. You can't practice something you don't know yet. So that's like the duality. So what does Duolingo do best? It makes things easy. So what are you doing? You're learning less. You're learning less. But what does that give you? Well, it's easier. Means you will spend more time. More consistency. It can, to a lot of people, it can be more fun. For me, fun comes after learning something. So I don't usually think of easy and hard as how engaging and whatnot it is. However, you have to remember this, right? So what is Anki? Well, Anki is dependent on how difficult you want it to be, right? Now, when we talk about difficulty, there's one last thing we have to remember. There is a threshold for most people, wherever it is, when something becomes unintelligible, right? Unintelligible. And I can't answer that question. You have to understand when you're no longer learning something. This point of unintelligible, like for difficulty rating, right? Say this is difficult, this is like easy, this is hard. You have to determine when something becomes so unintelligible, you stop learning. And for myself, it's around 80%. So usually I strive for like 90% comprehensible input. And it's reliant on the person, you, to understand if you are actually understanding 80 to 90%. It's very difficult for anyone to be able to identify that other than your closest friend or your family member who's watching you do these things. Other than that, it's yourself, because you're self-learning. Or a teacher. You know, if you go to a class, the teacher might have enough information on your performance to really know if you're comprehending. That's what grades do, right? In exam, 80%, 90% progress reports and whatnot. Hopefully that helps. But let's see. Let's catch up with chat here. I try to understand everything I can as much as possible, but there's a difference between hearing something and knowing all the nuance the person is saying. That's fair. I mean, it's going to be true no matter what you learn. There's always going to be a difference. Language, communication, semantics, we're human, so no one has telepathy. At least not that I'm aware of. So that statement is a generalized statement about the human condition. So that's fair, right? It's a good point. Where no matter, like, there's a difference between hearing something and knowing all the nuances the person is saying. To step back a little, you can never know the nuances of what another person is saying, since we are interpersonal creatures. Striving to know all the nuance of what a person says is kind of a unrealistic goal. However, one can always strive for that goal, like try to work towards knowing exactly what that other person is thinking, right? And language tries to capture as much of that, but it's rarely ever going to be complete, right? Telepathy is the answer for completeness. Duolingo is kind of a Doraemon. Yeah, Doraemon gadget. Yeah, it really is. It's a very, very training wheel. It holds your hands a lot. And total immersion, once again, is the dream. If you're a kid and you throw the kid into whatever situation they are and they come out like a superstar, that's the dream. Unfortunately, in my opinion, realistically, as one gets older, that becomes less and less of a pragmatic approach. So, to me, I don't know how old everyone is, but generally, when you're thinking about immersion, right? And I'm not going to use the word total. It's immersion is on a spectrum, right? This is 100% immersion and 0% immersion, right? It's somewhere along this continuum. The younger you are, and the less experience, in my opinion, the less experience in learning, the more you gravitate towards 100% immersion. You start retreating backwards as you gain more and more experience over your life, because you have more and more experience to juggle. You cannot be immersed in something as well when you gain more experience. Your experience is outside of the target task you're having. So the older you get, the more experience you gain, so the less immersed you're going to be. So your total immersion flag, maybe as a kid, is 100%, because kid, you have no idea what's going on. But that total immersion efficacy and threshold starts getting smaller and smaller as you become older and older, because there's more and more experience you must diminish, like especially a language. So for me, I don't do that. I work here and I move up. So I move in this direction as opposed to the other direction. I was thinking immersion as in the amount of time you're spending in a given language environment. That's still fine. That's still fine. Say for example, what allowed me, for example, say you spend, so you're saying total immersion 100% of the time. It still holds true. The more experience you have as you grow older, the less of that percent of time will be under immersion. Because the more experience you have, the more likely those experiences will be involved in your immersion. So for example, you might be thinking specifically about language itself. So it's like, as long as you think in Japanese or expose yourself in Japanese, you think that your own native language isn't taking hold. Like, what language are your dreams using? Language is not just written. Language is also imagery. Unless you have aphantasia. Sorry for the aphantasia people. Imagery. Your dreams are dependent on your experience. So no, not even if you are dreaming in Japanese, you can't possibly dream in Japanese, exclusion of your own experiences. As you're getting older, all your dreams are dependent on your experiences. It's like pretending to forget who you are. So that whole idea, in my opinion, of total immersion, in my opinion, is an uphill battle trying to believe that none of your prior experiences should be part of your learning experience for language. And for me, I did the opposite. I approached it in the sense that I progressively add on to my experiences by leveraging my experiences. You're in your 20s, I guess this is my age. Yeah, I mean, I think 20 is a great time where you're going to go through this transition, in my opinion. So like 20 for me is a ripe age for college. And I have a formal educational background. What I see a lot of time is when you start getting out of your adolescence, right? 1 of 18 or 1 to 118. Most of it is the product of immersion. Like, you know, everything's a first. This is your first soccer game, or your first time you're learning science, first time you're learning math. Later 20, that's fine. First time, like everything's a first, right? But the moment you start caressing over into right at the beginning of this transition, it's more new stuff, which is often college or leaving the nest. So you're still engaged in a lot of immersion things like budgeting, living alone. You're experiencing a lot of other transitions, right? But then when you start getting past like 25 to 30, you have salient skills, as in skills that are really conditioned in practice now. The question you have to ask yourself is, how many skills have you acquired through the process of immersion early in life? For me, the people that I typically talk to, when even into later stages of their lives, they still continue to rely on the skills that they learned early in life. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, by the way, I'm not even in my 20s anymore. I am 37. I'm 37. I am still trying to acquire new skills, right? I continue to habitually acquire new skills. And most of the time, I'm still working on the process of learning, as opposed to relying on what works continuously, right? So I don't like using skill is not that helpful. I think we're really talking about learning as a problem solving task, and critical thinking about it. So most of the time, as one grows older, I think the more you are able to leverage your experiences, the more likely you'll be successful at acquiring new things. Like, for example, what does an older person do much better than, hopefully, much better than their younger self? So you're comparing to your younger self. Well, you have more stories, right? At least I think you have more stories. You're able to contextualize things a lot more. So instead of running away from your experience, as in, oh yeah, I got a dream in Japanese, so that means I have to remember to forget English or whatever your target language is. You use that English to marry it with Japanese, in my opinion, personally. This is a hot take for myself. So my progress and my retention of Japanese, it's nearly married with English. Now, I need to I need to say something specifically though. Background. Just as a disclaimer for background, I live in an environment that is always mixed language. I'm always in a mixed language environment. So for me, I leverage that. So why work against my skills by making myself feel uncomfortable by straying away from it, right? So this isn't more of an advice or a panacea for everyone's learning experience. I like to encourage people to ask themselves, what are tools doing for you? What are the methods doing for you? What have you done? And do your best, in my opinion, to integrate as much of your experience as you can. If you can make your Japanese about your hobby, that's like a super win. So like if you like doing artwork, do artwork that allows you to use your Japanese. If you like cars, associate it with cars, right? So that's leveraging XP. It's leveraging your experience instead of doing, in my opinion, what a lot of people do, where they pretend like all their other experiences aren't relevant anymore to the learning of the language. Like, oh yeah, orange. Yeah, I have to stop thinking about orange. It's orange, right? Like, or oh yeah, like, oh no, I just thought of it in English or something like that, right? So in my opinion, I'm always reading these sentences, but I'm always asking myself, where would I use this? Like, you know, where would I use this phrase? Because I'm leveraging most of my experiences. If you're learning raw, in my opinion, like raw, it's like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I should remember right here. Burn it into my head. In my opinion, you're not gonna get much out of it. It's gonna be very exhausting as well. It's relying on rote memory is what I'm saying. Rote memory. You're practicing memorizing things, and if you're like a super genius, I'm not a super genius, by the way. I don't remember things like this. Duolingo sentences are weird. It's weird to you. Probably. Your sister eats apple at 10 o'clock. It's weird to you. Makes sense. Am I being as dumb as a donkey? I was relying on donkey. I should engage in other stuff. I think you'll find a lot of things you'll like. Okami. Ask yourself what you like, and I think you can integrate. Be creative. In my opinion, you're probably creative enough to make yourself want to use Japanese in the things you like, right? If you want to, lots of people say like, oh yeah, I love anime, so they use the Japanese they learn specifically to watch anime. You can do it for anything that engages you. It's the way, in my opinion, that's like the way to naturally or intuitively acquire something. Obviously, the tool itself is not going to help you acquire it. You have to actually engage in it, right? So, are these sentences weird? Well, they're not weird because I'm using Duolingo. I understand how Duolingo structures sentences. So when I leave Duolingo, Timmy, when I leave Duolingo, I'm not thinking this is weird. This is not like Duolingo. It's not Duolingo. So when you go out and you look at the sentences outside of Duolingo, they're going to be different sentences. They're no weirder or different than they're no weirder than Duolingo is to me, because I have no basis for what the thing I'm watching's structure is. It's only weird if you are thinking it from the perspective of what you want it to be. So a lot of times that can be the barrier to extracting useful information from something, right? Vlogs, you know, the vlogger that I listen to clearly does not structure sentences like Duolingo. So that's fair. So I learn both. And then I compare and contrast. And then you integrate all of that, in my opinion. It sounds simple, but it's not. I mean, I'm already like 700, 800. Would trying to write Japanese essays help? For what purpose? Do you want to write Japanese essays? I am going to... In terms of writing, the only thing I have done writing is to describe my day. For vocabulary memory, oh, that's a good question. I think it's great reinforcement. So writing, one thing I would say is writing essays, right? If your task is to remember something, I think the act of writing is an output, right? And the output will help reinforce whatever vocabulary you have now. However, the nature could be creative. So it could be like exploratory. Right now, the type of essay writing I'm thinking of is, for example, imagine yourself go to a zoo. If you go to a zoo, write as much as you can about zoos, right? That could help with reinforcing your memory, for sure. If you make it a creative prompt, there is a chance you could ask yourself like, oh yeah, you go to a dictionary and it's like, wait, I don't know this word yet. So that could help with acquiring, learning new things. And that is a fun experiment too. I do that while I'm reading these things. So writing itself, you don't necessarily have to literally write, right? You don't have to literally write the stuff. If you want practice in writing, you would have to literally output them, for sure. I do that every once in a while. Yeah. So Duolingo kind of does this. They give you themes. But the themes are too harsh. So when I'm doing like total recall, is what I call it, at the beginning of every stream, I think of the theme that Duolingo provided, but then I'm imagining the stuff in my head and then I'm collecting it. So for example, last unit was zoo, is the zoo. So I walk into a zoo, you look around, you see a saru, then you walk over to the distance, you see a zoo, right? You see some zoo. Then you see lion. Maybe there's a petting zoo zone around the outside where you can pet things. Naderu. Yeah, there's yagi, usagi, right? And then the idea is like, you don't necessarily have to rely on the literal symbolism or something. You can actually even imagine things, and if you can. There are people who have problems imagining like visual things in there. I've met a few people who don't really rely on this strategy, but the idea is there are many things you can do that can bring meaning together. I talked about this before, but when someone asks me what do I think about here, so right now, if I read ima kara Yamada sensei ni denwa shimasu, what I actually see is this. So that's what I actually see. Or like right now, immediately, that's what I see. And it might not make any sense at all. I've actually talked about this in like day 6 or something. So down, the down arrow means today, like right now, right down, and then from, right, because of kata's from. I didn't think of anything else other than the English word from. But when these are combined, then if I know down from, it means just now. And this is a mountain peak. This is a mountain peak, and this is what I think of a rice paddy. It's a square zone. So Yamada is what I get from that. And then this is supposed to be a graduation cap. So this is professor. And then the knee is pointing to professor. To professor. And then this is a side profile of a phone. This is a side profile of a phone. And I always pick up suru. So I pick up suru all the time. So that's kind of whatever gathers first. And then right as you pass it back, you'll get the rest of the meat, right? So the idea is you can construct things as many ways as possible. And if you have a lot of ways you can construct the things, you can pull them together. So one day you might forget what kata literally is. Like what is kata literally? Well, it's a romaji. You know, you can view it as kata. I don't have the kanji for this, and then that's where it stops for most people. That's where it stops for most people. You either know the hiragana, or maybe you know the kanji, which actually this phrase probably doesn't have a kanji. So most of the time people only restrict themselves to exactly what they need to know, as opposed to finding more and more ways to remember things. Wait, is it actually, or are these your ways of remembering them? That's actually how I see them. That's technically how I remember them too. It's both. It is actually and also how I remember them. Well, I'll do another one, for example, right? I already forgotten what my what my new vocabulary is. So for example, this is this. This is what I see for this thing. That's meeting. I see a chalkboard. So there's like a person here, right? Pointing at the chalkboard. This is meeting. Meetingu. As opposed to thinking about the word meeting, right? This is it's an arrow. This is an arrow with an X over it, like this. Ikitakunai desu, as in I don't want to go. So it's an arrow with a X over it, right? That would be you're not going anywhere. Like I don't want to go, right? So that kind of thing. And this is I put a heart on ga, because the closest thing, the first introduction of ga is heart. Daisuki desu. Ga daisuki desu. Or ga hoshi desu. It emphasizes the thing before it, and the context that I remember a lot is heart. The desire. It's not that it's going to help me with all the cases. It gets me to something that I can frame very quickly. So I think of ga as heart. Not that it's literally accurate or not. It helps me get to ga, as in the functionality of ga, as early as I can. Yeah, I got a lot of stories regarding all these things. Like how to explain why this is a rice paddy, right? This is a rice paddy. And why do I know this as a rice paddy is because of Tanaka, right? Or sorry, this way. Sorry. This way. Tanaka, right? This is rice paddy, and this is middle. Right. And this is Tanaka, which is related to Yamada, right? And this reminds me of a box and whisker plot. Sorry, like this is there's supposed to be an average here. So if you have a thing right here, it kind of reminds me of splitting it down the middle. So this is middle. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. It's what aids me in remembering these things. You're splitting. You could imagine this is a cake on top of a table, and you're splitting it down the middle. So that's naka. Naka is, and then when you're splitting it down the middle, it's also inside the thing. The knife is going inside the cake, right? And it's going in the cake. So naka means inside, in, right? And that's exactly what naka is, right? Doesn't have to work because other people say it. You can use your own memory stories and stuff to remember, come to the same conclusion as others, more or less. So lots of times when people say, well, that's not technically right, it's like, well, it gets me to the meaning, right? It's kind of like mnemonics. Lots of times people talk about mnemonics, right? Mnemonics are great if someone tells you it. If someone tells you it, like if you're asking for advice, someone tells you it. To me, it's even greater. It's even greater if you made it. You made the mnemonic. So most of my mnemonics don't make any sense until I explain it. However, even if I explain it and it doesn't make sense to anyone, if you get to the meaning, they won't know. It won't matter. It won't matter to them, right? So you find out your entire shorthand. I always talk about this little type of story where when I give someone my notes, right? When someone gets my notes, I'm always very apprehensive. Apprehensive about giving someone my notes because most of my notes is in shorthand. As I grow older, my shorthand becomes more and more esoteric over time. When I was a kid, I basically totally immersed. You know, how do you get total immersion? You copy everything. Your notes literally tries to capture everything it's going. Nowadays, if I ask an adult, what does this mean? I don't think I'm going to get the same answer from people like me or someone who's on my same wavelength. However, I would get the same answer from a very specific pre-selected group, because most people would say like, oh, it's an arrow pointing down. Like, all right. It also can mean decrease. It can also mean descend. It could be an arrow. You can see a chandelier. Yeah, you can see a chandelier, right? And to me, I think that is so wonderful way of learning a new language. If you can talk to other people, create memories, like why like one of the gold standards is to acquire language, you get to talk to someone, right? In that target language, and that exchange, but you're also gaining stories, you're gaining memory from it, and it's emotional, it's tackling. So honestly, yeah, it is a gold standard, but not everyone has like a native speaking Japanese person who's willing to sit down and spend most of their time talking at a level you can comprehend while creating new memories. So my best advice, honestly, unsolicited advice, is to find as many tools as you can to mirror your natural creativity in creating memories, right? And for me, streaming Duolingo is it. Like, I honestly think most of the things I learned from Duolingo is not necessarily because of Duolingo's design, but it's because I'm sharing that experience, right? It's so difficult to get enough tools to do that without you becoming too lazy to create. When you're reading flashcards, if you're a special person that is creating memory from a flashcard, it'll work like gangbusters. If you're a person who literally sees the flashcards and literally see those words, it can only be as effective as the literal flashcard. It can no longer transcend, in my opinion, it doesn't transcend beyond that. So Duolingo, absolutely, this is contextless sentence building, right? It's contextless. It is literally contextless. You, as the user, can provide all of that. You can provide the context. So, yes, the tool doesn't do that for you. And a lot of people wish Duolingo provides context. They wish Duolingo provides an entire story and all that stuff. That's great for learning, but acquisition is what most people are focused on in the long run. Their goal is acquisition, and acquisition leads to output. The downside is eventually you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do all these things for acquisition. So someone asked me earlier, this is like a digression to a post someone asked. They asked me like, what did you learn? What did you remember? Is it worth my time committing? And overall, my answer to that is most of the tools you have for language learning is helping you learn the language, your target language. Acquisition is ultimately when you start doing things beyond what the tool does. So a great way to kind of like trick yourself to doing that is use tools that provide different things. In my opinion, use tools that provide different things, non-overlapping things. Because when you use a tool that doesn't provide one thing, right? It doesn't do one thing, does not. You have to do it. The person you have to do it. And then use another tool that provides everything else except for the thing you practiced, and so on and so forth, right? So the idea is you as a person will then hopefully become creative enough where you don't need any of these tools anymore. All these tools just go away. Like it's gone, right? Because every tool did something to aid you in doing other things. And then eventually you can do it all by yourself. That, at least that's the idealistic point of view. So what am I doing? When I'm using Duolingo, I also practice, or kind of practice. Yeah, I also practice all the skills it doesn't do. It does not do with it. And Duolingo has given me a lot of things to think about that it does for me. And I take that into my other tools. So like when I'm watching anime, I kind of sometimes I kind of think of it like, oh, okay, there's a scene. There's a scene, let's say it's a 5-minute scene. Well, first, I'm like, okay, well, it's already provided all the context in the story. So instead, after that 5-minute scene, I create a word bank. It's like, okay, what are all the words that I remembered? Let's just write them down. And that's it. Because Duolingo does that fantastically. So I'm taking what Duolingo already does for me every single day, and I'm practicing it somewhere else. And then when Duolingo isn't providing me context, I talk about my day when I'm using Duolingo. So I'm always thinking about the anime I watched, the manga I might be interested in, the shows I might be interested in, and I'm bringing them and talking about them in Duolingo whenever I get provided words. So like ima, ima's great. I can use it right now, all the time. Ima this, ima wa this, ima wa that, etc. So even though it's introducing vocabulary at a snail's pace, right, for a lot of people, sensei. I was a sensei before. That kind of thing. It's not a perfect thing, but generally speaking, I'm trying to keep myself engaged, regardless of whether a tool is doing it or not. I like evaluating tools and things by bringing all my experiences. If you can engage as much of yourself as you can, that's where memory is. The reason why I believe in this engagement by tackling experiences is, okay, I'm not a psychobio guy or a neurologist as a disclaimer. However, I know a bit about how neuronal connections are done, like very loosely, neuronal connections, right? And how the brain physiology is. A little bit about brain physiology and how that is associated with memory, like memory establishments and recruitment, so to speak, right? And the idea is, if you can link and associate new information with old information, typically both physiologically and psychologically, these things will become stronger. Like the physical connection between them will become stronger. And right now, the loose way of how I understand, I'm very loose. I only have like maybe a year or like a basic class on neurobiology, right? The idea is, if you can make an information and contextualize it with old information, you're not wasting the effort of grooming old information in order to make space for new information. Space, both literally and physically, actually. So the things you choose to do, the memories you try, I am linking and layering all of my Japanese with my Fujianese, my Mandarin, my Cantonese, my Spanish, and my English. So when I recall one word, yes, I'm going to be slower, but I'm also going to remember them. So when I say now, I'm constantly thinking about ima. When I'm thinking of kata, I'm constantly thinking about from. And yes, it's almost like opposite of what most people suggest. Like, oh yeah, you need to abandon your. I get it, but for me, my goal isn't to talk like a rap god in Japanese. It's, I want to be able to speak to English and Japanese speakers. I'm layering the things. So for me, I got faster at practicing exactly what I'm practicing, which is to associate English with Japanese, because I speak English, and I also, how much does my Chinese knowledge help me with Japanese? I talk about them. It doesn't, I don't know if it helps or not. Like for example, mapo tofu. Mapo dao is how I remember it, but I will always remember it that way. Like what I mean is, those two are linked forever. Like mapo tofu, that katakana that I see is attached with mapo dao. So the more knowledge, relatable knowledge I have with each other, the more likely that whenever I say mapo dao, I would think of mapo tofu. The katakana, like I'm like kind of visualizing, seeing it in my head right now. So anything that overlaps, like yoroshiku, Yoroshiku is like nice to meet you, right? And I'm not even saying it like it translates to nice to meet you. I would say yoroshiku just because it's the same as why I don't actually even know how to say, see, now I don't even know how to say nice to meet you in Fujianese. So because I don't know how to say nice to meet you in Fujianese, I might ask my parents how to say nice to meet you in Fujianese. And then I'll learn Fujianese because I was curious about linking yoroshiku to nice to meet you in Fujianese. That's kind of the idea, right? So if I don't know the things, then I'll go out and learn them. If I learn one thing, I get solidify the other two things. Having Chinese paired with English really is overpowered from a Japanese learning perspective. That can be. I think so. However, I think you can pair anything with your stuff. Like, I think the most successful thing that I've ever gotten people to do whatever they want, right, or feel like they're up for whatever they want, is like, for example, someone doesn't like doing groceries. Like, let's just say they don't like doing groceries, right? But this person loves saving money or figuring out how to save the most money. So instead, we engaged in saving money in the act of doing groceries. And then over time, they can choose to like dissociate for them. So pair, yeah, it's not the best, but you have to grasp with whatever you have, right? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the thing. Like let's get to the core of habit formation. I like habit formation. Learning a language is a habit. It's gonna have to be a habit because it's a lifelong thing. It's a life skill. So oftentimes coupling things you know how to do with things that you need to establish. That's the same element. And things like overriding bad habits, I'm going to put bad habits as quotes because I don't see habits as being bad or good, but not appropriate at the time or not sustainable, right? Because if you have a bad habit, it's usually a habit that you can't sustain anymore. The difference between a bad and a good habit is one leads to undesirable consequences and the other doesn't. A habit is still habit formation. You can lump this together. You like let's say you like playing video games. This happens a lot. Like, well, guess what? I can probably say like, hey, you know what if I told you there's a chance, just a chance, that if you go out and touch grass for 5 minutes before you go on a video game, it might change the way you play a video game, for better or for worse. Would you be willing to do that? Right? I'm not making guarantees that it's like, oh yeah, touching grass for 5 minutes outside is going to improve your video game. That's like, that's sensationalism. But the idea is you're tackling that person's curiosity because the video games like possibilities. So you're tackling what they enjoy about video games, like discovery and stuff. And what happens is the person itself will be motivated to do the same thing, like to do things, and their touching grass may become associated with video games. So then eventually you get to the point where they were like, ah, yeah, I should go out and hang out in the sun for 5 minutes before I play video games. So kind of, it works that way. When I go outside, I might be inspired to play video games. So that's kind of the same deal here, but only now I'm contextualizing it. So whenever I'm thinking about an English word now, like when I'm eating, I'm like, Gohan. But I'm also Gohaning. So I go upstairs, I'm having ban gohan, right? Ban gohan o tabemasu. Or I guess ban gohan o tabemashita, right? When I ate dinner, what was in my dinner? Well, I saw rice. It's obviously gohan as well, right? There were peas, I can't say peas yet. So let's go and look for peas. So the idea is now the habit for me is I tell people I spent about 700 hours on Duolingo learning Japanese. But really, when I describe what I'm doing each day, some people might actually call it total immersion. Like, I don't stop thinking about Japanese. I was watching a episode of Loki season 2. Loki season 2, and I was thinking, wait, would Loki be translated to Akuma? It's like, could I call Loki Akuma? And the only reason I know Akuma is because Akuma is coming out soon for Street Fighter 6. That's kind of the idea. I literally continue to want to engage in Japanese. Japanese is no longer tiring. It's not a chore anymore. It's not exhausting to think about Japanese. So like when you are apologizing for making it difficult, that's so normal. Like every single second when I'm not doing Duolingo. Oh, it actually dropped? Oh, I didn't know if it was today or tomorrow. Sub-Zero, yeah. Oh, okay, Sub-Zero. Thanks for cheating on me with Akuma. Thanks, Sub-Zero. I'm just kidding. Definitely enjoy that. So, yeah, Duolingo is a tool. It's a means to an end. Eventually, your goal, in my opinion, your goal, right? Like most language learners, is one day you get to create things. You get to create words, even. Like what I mean by that is, I just said gohaning, right? Gohaning. That's Japanglish. Like bangohaning. I'm eating dinner. But the thing about bangohaning is you know how to say I'm eating dinner in both languages. But you're choosing to bangohaning is because you're creating things now, in my opinion. I tell Japanese people that my goal is able to speak in Japanese people only, in Japanese. Wait, I tell Japanese people that your goal is able to speak in Japanese, speak only in Japanese with Japanese people. Wait, just like only use Japanese. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, 2 Japanese people. Yeah. And you got to prepare yourself for that, right? You got to prepare for yourself for that. My goals are different. So let's share the goals. I don't really think of a goal. Like there isn't a goal for me, I guess. I guess my goal is to learn some Japanese. And I really do mean the word learn some Japanese. It doesn't even matter to me if I can speak Japanese or not, or write Japanese. But the thing is, learning Japanese will naturally cause me to write and speak Japanese anyway. So I'd rather focus on what I can do and continue to explore what I don't know about my learning, and it will happen if it happens. I'm not a very goal-oriented person anymore, so yeah, all roads leads to Rome. And this entire conversation that we're having, I spend half the time actually doing this on stream. So, I don't actually spend the 700 hours on Duolingo. It's a backdrop to be talking about learning. I enjoy learning. I want to make people, in my opinion, show that even when you're not literally learning a language, you can learn something in the process of learning. You can discover yourself. I think when you can smile and talk to people about what you do, it is almost immeasurably more valuable than sitting here and saying, oh, I need to get my vocabulary done. So, well, you can do it tomorrow, like with reasonable doubt, right? With reasonable constraints. However, building memory it gives you that motivation, right? My current goal with Norwegian, I'm just using it every day until the end of day and be like, that was all I wanted to use it for. So far it hasn't gotten even close. Work in progress. One day, right? One day. For me, yeah, not even close. I always go out for a run, look at keys, look at ES, look at I do some wataruing. Tenki, right? Go out, look at the sky for Tenki. They just keep going, and eventually it'll be there. If it's not. All the fine EAs, yeah, all the fine EAs. Get on my pasokon, right? Pasokon, in my seki, and talk into. I don't know what a microphone is yet, so we're gonna have to work on that. Type on my keyboard. I don't know what a tablet is yet. Using my pin and my mouse, right? Use my meh. Use my meh and my mimi. My mimi to listen to ongaku o kikimasu, right? Mizu, right? I don't know how to say bottle yet. So, Mizu. This is water, I promise. Water. What do you feel about the potential for music to help? That's a great question. For me, music is kind of like my sound source. I think music was fairly decent, nice for when I was learning English, memorizing songs and stuff. Oh yeah. So for me, I want to add a little bit more. It's a sound source. So what I mean by that is, it's so great if you start like actively listening to music. And what I mean by that is, one way of actively listening to music is the lyrics, right? Sure, right? You're learning to the context of the lyrics. But you can also listen to pitch. You can also listen to cadence. You can also listen to volume. And I have a music background as well. This is the same with what about music? What about voice acting? And for me, if you can actively listen to sounds to help for language, you'll know what is high pitch and low pitch. You'll know if it's an increase in cadence or a decrease in cadence. You'll also practice if it's higher or lower volume. A lot of people listen to music. I know this is going to be belaboring the point. Listens to music top down now. Where they take and focus on the bottom thing, the one bottom thing, and then ignore the rest. So when you're listening for lyrics, you're not focused on pitch a lot of times. Like if you're focusing on the meaning, right? Meaning of the lyrics. But you can do all of these. You can take turns. Like first, listen to the lyrics. Then you can listen to the pitch. You can look at the composition as a whole, right? How does that help with language? Well, language, the sentence has a composition. you know? Whether it's right or wrong, that's a different story. That whether it's wrong or right, that's a different story. But for me, like for example, I think of music as I think of language as a combination of sounds a lot of times. So, imakara, Yamada sensei, Yamada sensei ni, Yamada sensei ni, denwa shimasu, right? Denwa shimasu. So, for individuals who don't necessarily do like music stuff per se, it could sound like one whole string of stuff, right? Oh, hey there, Osman. Hello. Yeah, from YouTube. So there's this thing where like you can also do like pauses and whatnot, like music pauses and goes, you know, there are syncopations and non-syncopations and slurring, sliding, that kind of thing. Maybe not as appropriate for Japanese, but what happens, in my opinion, is when you actively listen to music, language in itself, when you're saying if it helped, I'm guessing you're talking about language learning. Music, in my opinion, is an even more like dynamic exploration of how to manipulate sound into structure. And a lot of times when you're humming, you're vocalizing, when you're singing along, you're actually doing a lot more dynamic process than you think, and then you're trying to create order and form on them. So it's like a top-down perspective, right? When you're humming, you're using your intuition a lot of times to hum along or sing along. And then eventually, if you actively do that, you can actually deconstruct it. So now if you're saying ah and ha, 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 right? But that's just one note, right? It's one note. You can, how does it help? Well, when you hear someone say like gurai versus gurai, you'll be able to hear it because you were actively listening to music already. The music, you can clearly hear a pitch difference between gurai and gurai. And that, in my opinion, is kind of the extra stuff for listening to music. If I was trying to frame it into like something Japanese related. So you can hear and imitate if you were humming and singing along already. If you spend a lot of time imitating people and imitating sounds, like singing is a natural imitating. Not a lot of people imitate speech patterns. I kind of imitate speech patterns over time. Like I want to sound like this person because this person is very articulate, right? Or this person's cadence is very awesome. Or you want to avoid sounding like someone. That's also a thing where you're like, I don't want to sound like a hype lord, so I'm going to lower my volume most of the time. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll learn to slow down my speech when it's important. Well, you can kind of do that in a form of expression, even if you get a sentence incorrectly, or like say you're trying to express you're sad. Well, you can say it in a sad way too. And there's so many more dynamics as well when it comes to like sound. We won't even start on like body language, right? Hand gestures and nonverbal communication. That can also embellish your expression of stuff. Case in point, ka, ne, right? Ka, ne. What is my face doing? Well, my eyebrows tend to raise when I'm saying ne or ka. Because I'm raising my eyebrow, I'm going to naturally create an uptone. Even though these are markers of unknown and not actually the question in themselves, right? Things like that. And how do you create that? How do you produce those sounds? How do you intuit those things? It could come from music. It could definitely come from music. Obviously, you could say something like, "いいですね," right? "いいですね" versus "いいですね" or "いいですね." So you have plenty of functionality, and what I mean by that is, it might not teach you literally new words, but it helps you remember the words you already know and the flexibility of what they can do, right? So music, all that stuff, if you're engaged in it and you're creative enough, it's probably helpful. I typically don't focus on how it's helpful or like how much helpful it is. Anything is still better than nothing, in my opinion, but that's kind of funny. Sakana, the particles of fish. Yeah, sakana. Yeah. So, I would say yes. And I'm gonna end the digression here because I think we're kind of over around an hour. I typically like lump and try to, if I'm gonna pull and invest in a discussion, that's usually where I head off. I don't know if there's anything else I want to say here, other than if you're having trouble doing something, like say remembering something, like if you're having trouble remembering something, here's a fun little thought experiment. Is that how you spell remembering? So if you're having trouble with this, ask yourself, the things you remember, how do you remember those things? This is a great thought experiment, by the way. So if you're having trouble remembering things, how do you remember them in the first place? Think about the things that you remember best, right? You remember best. And and then how you address those things, right? For example, there are some obvious ones, right? Recency is a great one, right? That's pretty unadulterated. If it happened recently, you probably remember more of it, that type of thing. But then you ask yourself, well, how do you make it recent? If you remember things that are recent, then what are the ways you can do to make it constantly recent? The answer might shock you, in my opinion. Most people would say, oh, you just practice every single day. Just keep practicing. Like, but then ask yourself, how? You're not going to go 24/7 practicing, are you? Right? So how do you practice it? And how does that work? Like, what works so far? You're going to have different answers based on the person. Some people say, well, I set 1 hour aside on Anki or something, right? What if I told you one of the interesting things that most people don't do about recency is what I call microdosing. So instead of focusing on an extended time, you attach whatever it is you're trying to remember. Say the word is sakana, right? Sakana for fish. Oops, stroke order, my bad. Right? Sakana, the kanji for sakana for fish. You can microdose it. What is a way to microdose something? I don't know. Attach it to water. I'm gonna drink this bottle of water. And I'm gonna think about mizu. And what do you find in mizu? Or umi? Sakana. So then what happens is, well, you're not practicing an hour every day. You're just thinking about it every once in a while. Constant, like recently. So There are different approaches in that. And then you ask, what else do you remember? Oh, it has to be fun. That's usually the other thing, the fun. And this is incredibly nebulous too. So then you ask yourself, well, what makes things fun for you? I have no answers for any of these things. This is not these are thought experiments. So what is fun? Well, a lot of people say like challenging. This is a common one. Like it has to be challenging. Okay. Well, you ask yourself, the tools you are using, are they challenging? For the record, most of the time the answer is actually no. Hey, I peeked my head in. What is fun? Exactly. What is fun to you, right? A lot of people would say challenging. And then I ask them, okay, can you explain to me, what do you constitute as challenging? And the first thing that comes out of their mouth is doing something that I like. Too deep of a dive. Listen, Lotus, you can join in at any time. Doing something that I like, that's not challenging to me, honestly. And then when they continue to describe the thing, they describe something they already know how to do. If you already know how to do it, do you think that's really challenging? And these are just questions that I ask. I don't know the answers. I'm not providing any answer. Challenging sounds like something you don't know how to do, right? So the question is, then eventually I get to the person where it says like, so can something you don't know how to do, be fun, right? So we've gotten to the point where like, don't know how to do it. Can it be, it'll be challenging, right? It'll be challenging. Can it be fun? And that's usually where I lead people. A lot of times it is a bit of leading because of Socratic method and whatnot. But the thing is, then those people will be able to find out. Because if they think challenging is fun, then they might be willing to engage in something they don't know how to do and then make it fun. So if they can make it fun, then language learning is for you. It's really, I don't usually talk about language learning. I'm talking about general things. Like I typically work on like life coaching things, like life coaching, or trying to get someone like a friend to want to embrace things and that kind of thing. And I don't do anything really. I'm asking questions. And I truly believe that most people are able to answer their own questions in the sense that they are creative enough. I like to believe they are creative enough to answer this. So this is one of the most, in my opinion, ironically, for lack of a better word, one of the most challenging things to do, which is how to get yourself to think that doing something you don't know is both challenging and fun. Not the same as doing something you do know and choosing the challenge. So something that is fun already, that you do know how to do, and challenge yourself in that. And that to me is kind of like language learning. How do most people start choosing language learning? It's like, how are they motivated? They start with something fun that they like. And then because of the fun that they like, they bring it into language learning. And then at some point, it might not be enough. So they need to find other ways of engagement, find other ways. Because eventually the quote unquote grind of language learning supersedes their fun and their like motivation of it. And oftentimes this type of thing, this type of like cycle of questioning can get them to become creative on their own. When someone asks me directly, if anyone like asks me directly for, I don't know, for ideas, I first ask them questions, right? I need to know, hey, is there anything else you do for fun? Right? What else do you do for fun? Could be video games. All right. Can you relate video games to the thing you want to do? So the whole time going back to way to the first point of all of this, the goal I'm reaching is I want to leverage the person's experience and then evolve or change, like grow and build on that experience for whatever they want. So instead of spending so much time pretending like your previous experiences don't exist and then learning a new thing because it's new, the new thing, you can make it almost feel like it's an old thing that you're building on. So what is learning Japanese to me, for example? What is learning Japanese? I'm going to tell you now, I learned a lot of English. I learned a lot about English and about all my gaps because I've become complacent about my English. So I've constantly talked about English over the length of my Japanese learning. So whatever I learn in English is attached to Japanese. What's a great example? Amari, we just talked about this. I just talked about this with Lotus. Today, nanimo, right? Right? Nanimo was introduced attached to a negative past tense verb. And my first thought was, right? Amari. And immediately Lotus spoil it for me and say, yeah, it's attached to negatives. Much like Amari is. So now from now on, Amari and Nanimo are attached to each other, associated with negative verbs. That's it. That's one of the lessons that I remember immediately from the first like 5 minutes of this lesson. Is it written in Duolingo? Is it written in Duolingo? Absolutely. 100%. No. That is not part of Duolingo. But the thing is, what I know about Amari and Totemo, right? Totemo. That was the wrong pitch accent. Totemo. Right. Oh, actually. Yeah. It's either a day or a te. I have to work on my de and tes. It's probably totemo. Yeah, totemo. This and this both translates to very, or it increases the degree of something. Increases the degree, so it's up very, right? It's the up very. However, totemo and amari are used. This is negative and this is positive for a degree, to extend the degree of something. 例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、例えば、 So because of that exists in Duolingo, almost exclusively, because you're observing things that are there and aren't there. Like, so you have to be aware what isn't there as well as what is there. And immediately when I saw Nanimo and suddenly is negative, I immediately thought it's probably the same situation. And of course, Lotus already spoiled that for me. I was gonna look it up this in the evening, and that stuff is exactly what I mean. So, nanimo, mada something nane, naru, nanu. What is the last thing? And I'm guessing mada is already or still, and then I don't know. Shira. Oh, Shiranu. Okay, is that Shiranu? Is it kind of like No, right? No. Understand? Understand is wa. Starts with it's no. Oh, it's a negative term. Oh, okay. Oh, it's a negative. Oh, okay. Got it. That's a good place to stop. I think that's a good place to stop. I'm honestly, what is the take-home message? Let's just end this with a take-home message. The take-home message, in my opinion, you're not 100% what kind. Okay. So, take-home message. This is gonna be a brain thing. When you make connections, you are quite literally and figuratively making connections in your brain. So in my opinion, creating as many associations, even more so if you created those associations, I'd like to wager that over time, these associations will be faster than you think. And will largely be the root of your most salient memories. And that's kind of what I'm trying to demonstrate live. Where, yeah, I could spend 3 hours talking about Japanese but not actually learning Japanese vocabulary, but at the same time still get to where a lot of people would spend a disproportionately a lot of time trying to grind their way and feel unhappy. Like unhappy, constantly looking, prescribing to tips and tricks like hacks and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think if you can get someone, inspire someone to be creative, that psychological ownership and personalized memory is, it has no comparison in my opinion. What can compare to your own memory, your own personalized memory? Really no one, right? You yourself. New is the same as, oh, nah, I see, nai, but it's like an alternative older version. Oh, okay, that explains a lot. I see. Shiranu. Okay, instead of shiranai. I see, I see. Fair enough. あれが、あ、sorry, ありがとう, Maku sensei. Thanks. But for me, that's probably the take-home message. Don't underestimate yourself. I don't want anyone to underestimate themselves. If you're stuck in somewhere, ask yourself what already works. What already works, and how can you build on top of that? I think anyone who's gotten to this point, if you're learning a language optionally, you have so many things that already work, and you can build on top of those. Having someone come by and something or some tool that tells you you should stop doing things that already work for you without adding to it, it's kind of like spending a lot of time undoing yourself, in my opinion. The idea here is to engage in building on those things. We all start in different places, right? We all have different educational backgrounds, exposures, but there's something that already works. Spend 5 or 10 minutes engaging in new things, but working on those things that already work. I really earnestly believe that there isn't anyone who's so deficient in experience that they are incapable. There are extenuating circumstances. When a person is emotionally compromised, like they're chronically depressed. I talk to a lot of people who are chronically depressed, self-deprecating. That's a whole different ball game. They are legitimately not emotionally able to participate in creative thought on their own working environment. That's a different story. But when you're voluntarily doing something, generally you probably have something that works. And it's always worth investing time into adding more to it. I haven't learned like this ever. I think the last thing I want to thank is everyone else, right? I want to thank everyone else for their input, because my experience with Duolingo is that I've learned a lot of other people's techniques, and slowly but surely I'm testing them and integrating them. And Duolingo itself, learning it this way, dude, I don't remember learning this way. I told the first couple, like people like Indy and Lotus, the one thing that makes me really enjoy Duolingo is that it makes me feel like I'm 10 again. Some people think this is beneath them, right? Some people might, I get it, the whole pride and arrogance and thing, that learning something as fundamental as this, rote memory strategy, is beneath them, right? But for me, it's an opportunity to build on this. I don't remember learning like this since I might even go back to when I was 5 years old. Like, when did I do this technique? I learned all my multiplications. I learned multiplication and division. I talked about this. I think it was when I was 4 years old. My parents gave me a book on multiplication and division. And the way I remember multiplication and division was literally memorizing the table. And eventually memorizing that table allowed me to build more meaning on top of that. So that provided the advantage. It doesn't matter if I didn't understand that, I don't know if you guys ever seen this table back in the day, but it's like, it lines up like this, right? And then it's like a grid, and it tells you all the results of the multiplication, and then you do the reverse for division, using like multiples on the axes. And I had no idea what they meant. Like, I didn't know that 1 times 1 1 times 1 is 1. Like, what is that concept? But what happened is I have a memory. This is XP. And because I have this concept, I can attach meaning to this concept. And that's what Duo does best. If I had to say something that Duo does best, it gives you this quote-unquote weird sentence. Most people would think this is weird. I actually agree. Most people would think this is weird, and I agree it's kind of weird. It provides me all the context with all the words and some sort of meaning that I can flip around. I can flip around any way I want, right? Like, how do I go from this to what you call it, a natural sentence? Well, that's the fun, isn't it? In my opinion, right? Tanoshi, tanoshi desu. Ne? Right? Tanoshi desu ne? How do you go from something weird to something natural? It's part of the game. At least in my opinion. So that's where the fun is. I think a lot of times what this feels like for a lot of people is I'm wasting my time. Right? I sort of feel that. I sort of understand. Like, why do I need to learn this first when I can just go to the natural sentence, right? Why waste time on learning an unnatural sentence? Well, you can. Go for it. Go for the natural sentence first, right? For me, how do I know this is unnatural? Well, I'll go and look for natural sentences. But the thing is, I know what's unnatural too. Is that useful? It can be, actually. It's only useful to the person who tries to make use of it. So from now on, if I think of this sentence, I can probably find a natural sentence if it's unnatural. Because I already wasted time remembering a specific structure. It's kind of like the people who talk about, oh, don't start with the mass form. Start with the plain form. It's irrelevant to me. It's a process. Eventually, everything will be relative to the mass form. If I start in the plain form, everything is relative to the plain form. So what is the natural way of learning Japanese? Some people say you have to learn Japanese by starting with kana. Well, I didn't really do that. I did like half and half. I did some kana some days, and then I did like a kana every like two lesson sets. Eventually you'll get it done. What happens is as I'm learning kana and I'm learning new words, those new words became the source of my kana. That's legitimately how I remembered it. Like, for example, the cheapest way is how do I remember what how do I remember what is, right? The first letter, Romaji, right? You can start with a Romaji. Then you can do Hirakana, or you can remember as O. If you remember O, it's A, which is also A. There you go. Right? How do you start with eto? Right? Eto, no, ie. Ie is fantastic. So they introduced ie really, really early, and you don't even need the ie. Here's your I example. E and E, right? E and E. So you always remember these kind of as well. Kind of thing. Examples. Not a waste of time if you don't let it be a waste of time. In no way am I saying this is easy. It's easy, hard is dependent on the person yourself. You have to ask if it's easy or hard for you. For me, it's second nature. Yeah, that's the spirit. All right. We'll end this section and then we're gonna continue our lesson. Today's a half day for lesson learning, so I have plenty of time to digress. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about some techniques or perspective or mindset that could inspire other people to do whatever their version is. So there are no hacks. I didn't reveal any hacks. Just some thought experiments that I hope other people can spin it in their own way and make language learning fun, engaging, challenging, and very memorable for them as well. Imagine learning Japanese with Hanzi first. You're gonna have to tell me how that feels, Gabriel. You can do that, Gabriel, since you're already learning related things, right? I can no longer do that because it's already too late. But I would love to hear how someone uses Hanzi for Japanese learning. I'm gonna learn English again with Japanese though. That is going to be fun. Okay.
後で同僚に電話します。
Okay, like most things, I gotta take a quick bathroom break before we continue. I'll be right back.